To start us out today, we've got questions from our children and our teens in our community, our youth group. What is love to you? What does love mean to you? That's a beautiful question. So it's a feeling inside, isn't it? It's a feeling inside. We know inside when we're in that energy and in that space, there's a warmth, what we call warmth and fuzziness, right? A softness. There's a softness to that energy. It's not a hard energy. So it's a feeling inside of us that has some warmth to it, some softness, some fuzziness. And there's another piece. It's also expansive. There's a bigness to it. There's a largeness to it. You know what's beautiful about your question? We human beings, especially as adults, we often behave as if love is like this thing that we have a limited quantity of. Like when you open up the milk jug, there's only so much of it, so much milk inside the milk jug, right? But love in this soft, gentle feeling that can be an inside feeling, it doesn't actually have a limit to it. It's not like the milk in the jug that it runs out. There's a limitlessness to it. So love is kind of the soft, gentle, warm energy that doesn't have a limit to it. It can go on, it's large, it can go on forever. And it's a way that we live into relationship. From that inside energy, we can live into relationship. And in fact, it's also how we live into our best selves. What a beautiful question. Such a simple question and a beautiful question. All right, let's do that. Okay. What does spirit of life mean to you? So, this is a great question because the phrase spirit of life, it's a made-up UU phrase. I don't know that any other denomination or group of folks use it. It's us. And insofar as we kind of made it up, it can mean nothing or very little, and it can mean a lot. And I hope that it can mean a lot. It should mean a lot. So I'm not the type of person to use any concept or any language or any paradigm that has no meaning for me. I don't do that. So if I use a phrase, it has some meaning for me, and I've had some time to kind of think of it a little bit. And I hope our kids will too. So let's think, there's two big words in there. There's spirit and there's life. So life is this. It's what we're doing right now. We're alive, we're walking around, we have interactions. And spirit might mean like the energy. So spirit of life, it might mean like the energy behind life. What's the energy? What's the essence? What's the feeling? What's the underneath thing or the woven into the fabric of life? So spirit of life, it connects with the last question. I love that. I just saw them lying here together and I was like, this is great. So another child asked about love. So let's hold that as an example. Love, I said, is without a limit. It's not like milk in the jug that the milk runs out. It's an expansive energy. It can go on forever, and it's a warm, beautiful energy, and it's about relationship. So one thing that spirit of life could mean is that the thing behind life, the thing that is motivating us, the thing that is guiding us, is a warm, fuzzy, expansive relational energy, such as love. And there's other interpretations, but I'll leave you with that for now, because that's a beautiful one to hold. And what might it mean for you? Like, what's behind life? What's the thing woven into the fabric of life? What's the thing that's guiding life? That's a beautiful question for each of us to hold and wonder about. So those were questions from our younger kids. I'm going to do a couple questions from our youth group. From our youth group, why are you you? And they said, it's in seriousness, but it's also a pun. So, so for those who are familiar with our youth group in our congregation, The name of the group is Young Religious Unitarian Universalists, and the acronym is YRUU. So the question they put in is, why are you you? Our younger members ask such good questions. You know, it is a very important question, actually. So I turned 50 this year, and I'm constantly in awe of the fact that I'm still learning about myself. Like that journey has not ended. And in fact, I'm constantly learning new things about who I am, about how I want to live into my values, about who I want to be in the world, what I want to give my time and energy to. It's an unfolding, it's a process, discovering who I am. And in fact, not just the why am I who I am, or why are any of us how any of us are, who any of us are, but like, how are we? How are we the thing? How are we ourselves? That's also a really important question. So the why gets you to, oh, I now understand more about who I am, what I'm needing to be in the world, what my inner gifts are, how I want to bring them alive, what I want to bring alive. The next part is how. How do you then do that? Once you're understanding more and more and more about yourself, which is unfolding, it's a process, then the fun part is go and be that. Don't squelch it, don't hide it. Be actually more of yourself. I hope that answers what our youth group member was asking. That's a beautiful question. Okay, another one. Whoa. What do you personally think the future of our congregation will be 10 years from now? And what are you doing to get us there? It's all on me. Thank you for that. Oh, I don't know. Well, okay, so it's not just our congregation. I mean, so what your question's evoking for me, there's no way to answer that question disconnected from the society we live in, right? So ideally, any spiritual, ethical, religious group of community people striving to be those things, we must be in dialogue with the society that we're a part of and responsive to the emerging needs, the emerging spiritual, ethical, emotional needs of our time. If we're not doing that, we're irrelevant. We actually don't matter. We can close our doors and go out of business. So that's not who we are. That's Unitarian Universalists. We have a long tradition of acutely paying attention to our social milieu, the context that we're living in, and being responsive to that. That's part of who our tradition is. It's not true of every tradition, by the way, but it is absolutely true of ours. So first off, that's a good thing. I'm lifting up a positive, that we are responsive to our societal and cultural context, the milieu, the time we're in. Okay, and that time is so unbelievably complex. In my, as I just acknowledged, 5 decades of being alive, like I have not previously seen any other time that looks like this. It makes me yearn wistfully for my childhood of the 1970s, which was no cakewalk, but seems infinitely simpler than the time we're in now. You know, I have to hold things in my head like, could the United States as a civil society survive 2 more election cycles in which almost half the nation thinks that the outcome of electoral processes was fundamentally unfair? That's a real wondering. Maybe 1 more cycle like that. Could we survive 3 cycles in a row? 3 presidential election cycles where half the country thinks that the outcome is bogus and unfair? We had almost open warfare the last time around, January 6th a year ago. Do we think we can survive 2 more cycles like that? I don't know, but I wonder that, right? So here's where the societal context matters. There are really big things going on. There are really big things going on in that societal context. That's closer in. Like, can our civil society and our structures, our democratic structures, survive the internal tensions? That's closer in Then, if we figure that out, then we've got climate change and climate devastation. And that's ramping up too. I used to think that's like a 30, 40, 50-year time horizon, but maybe that's also now 10, 15, 20 years. I don't know. So your question's evoking a lot of I don't knows for me, but they're really important I don't knows. And what I can tell you is I know for 100% for sure that we are the type of people, we are the type of community, we are the type of spiritually, ethically, emotionally oriented people who pay attention to these things. We don't turn away from them. And we're constantly seeking to engage and make things better. So knowing that that is who we are as a faith tradition, historically, this is not new. This is who we've always been. This is who we have historically been as Unitarian Universalists. So knowing that about us, I have a lot of confidence that we may not be able to solve every problem and need out there, but I do know we will rise to the occasion and do our level best to meet the needs that not only exist, but will continue to emerge in the future. That I do trust. And I can offer, you asked me what am I going to do? I will join you and all of us side by side in doing the level best that I can and that we collectively can in meeting those needs. Where does love come from? This is interesting. So we had a little bit of a variation on this question in the first service, but this is distinct and it's different. Oh, wow, that's a really good question. Okay, so first, the question in the first service was, what is love? And so my answer to that, I had to wind my way to it, but it was like warm, fuzzy energy that's very open-hearted, kind of expansive. It's a limitless energy. It's a relational energy. So where does that come from? I work with spiritual teachers who believe very deeply that it's part of the fabric of the universe, of everything that we're connected to and a part of. I'm sitting with that deeply. That's like a newer teaching or message for me. So is it part of the fabric of the universe? There's a lot of things we could look at that point towards that, right? Other species other than us behave as if they're motivated by love, by affection, by caring. Elephants grieve deeply. They mourn. I mean, they deeply mourn the loss of elephants that are in their pod when they die. Even our household pets, they nuzzle us. I had a pet parrot once. I had no idea birds have feelings. Birds have feelings. I only learned that because I had a pet parrot. I wouldn't have known otherwise. That bird cared about me. It really did. I was surprised. I was like, oh my gosh, it's got this wide range of emotions. So yeah, I mean, there's evidence to that maybe love is an intrinsic part of the fabric of this reality that we're a part of. I'm still praying, reflecting, meditating, thinking very deeply on that. I don't have an answer to that. But I know people that I really look up to and learn from hold that love is intrinsic to the universe and the reality that we're a part of. That's about as good an answer. I guess you could take another one, which is that it's also a choice. Ooh, that's a good one, right? Love is a choice. Where does it come from? Our volition, our action, our choice. So we're over and over again, we're confronted with difficult situations in life. What are you going to do? How are you going to show up? Believe me, there's no shortage of reasons to show up as frustration and hostility. We see this in the day-to-day world. So what's another thing we can do? Choose love. Choose it over and over again. Keep choosing it over and over again. So one possibility, it's intrinsic to the fabric of reality. The other, it's a choice. It's a thing we choose to do over and over and over again. Good question. You got me thinking there. That's good. What's your favorite video game? All right, well, I turned 50 this year, so I grew up with Pong and, like the early days, the things that are now in museums, literally in museums. We took our children, there's a museum, it's called the Museum of Play in Rochester, New York. We took our kids there in the winter break. They dug up all the Atari cartridges from the 80s out of the dirt, out of landfills. And they're now museum pieces at the Museum of Play in Rochester. So from my era of video games, which is practically prehistoric, there was a game called Dig Dug. Only you Gen Xers are gonna know what I'm talking about. And Joust, Burger Time. Only Gen Xers are gonna know what I'm talking about. Anyway, anybody young, you think grandpa's on a go now. He's just gonna keep talking about the video games that nobody knows anything about anymore. So thank you to the little ones for some good questions. We've got our youth group with us today. I wanna get to some of the youth group questions. Do you believe in anything godlike? So the emphasis there is godlike, and it's lowercase, G-O-D-like. So how I interpret that is like, godlike can be energy, it can be essence, just as we were talking about, like maybe is love an intrinsic energy, an intrinsic part of the fabric of the universe? Maybe. And if it was, we could call that lowercase g God, or something really important. See, we use language as code language, it's shorthand, right? So when we lowercase g God, something really important, something that really matters, that maybe motivates, inspires us, that's an ultimate part of reality, right? Why not love? It seems to be. I'm really thinking very deeply about that. But there are other things too. What else could, I think, even aside, I used to say, and this is also still in evolution, that just energy itself seems to be a part of the fabric of reality. What is that energy? I mean, for me, emotional energy is very palpable. I can feel it. It's a very real physical thing for me. But we know from science, E equals mc squared, right? So energy is always around us. It's never not in existence. It changes forms. We know that there's dark matter and dark energy that we don't even understand. There's forms of energy we don't understand yet. We can only indirectly measure. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of ways to understand this small g God as opposed to the big G theistic God of some traditions. And it could be love. It could be energy or essence. An impulse. There's a lot of ways to understand that. And you specifically asked, do I? Yeah, probably. Sure. I believe energy exists, I believe love exists, and those are really important, all-permeating concepts. So sure, I believe in something that's a lowercase g, godlike. Yeah, these are really good questions. I'm puzzling them out with you in real time. Isn't that great? Okay. What can one do to stop the police from killing people of color? Thank you. Thank you for that. I've had my own journey in our nation in understanding how our social structures relate to people who are obviously not visibly identifiable as white. And it's an interesting thing because white culture writ large does not treat me, being Indian American, as BIPOC, meaning Black, Indigenous, as a person of color. It's often assumed, I'm treated culturally as if I'm not, actually. And yet my experiences in the culture are not that of being somebody who's visibly identified as white. So I've got these two things that happen simultaneously. I'm invisibilized by the culture. Oh, you don't count. Your identity's practically white. But practically doesn't mean white. And yet I live with cultural realities that make it absolutely clear that I'm not. And one of my experiences, I was early in my career, ministry career, I was living in Connecticut. I had a fancy Mustang those days. I was a cool minister once upon a time, before becoming a dad. So I was driving my Mustang a little too fast, and I got pulled over. I deserved to be pulled over. And the cop wrote a ticket. And then checked on the ticket, they have things like they track pullovers. Because they track racial data, they have to report it for equality and discrimination purposes. Who are they pulling over and how often are they pulling over particular categories of people? He checked off that I'm white. I told it, and you have to sign receipt of the ticket. I said, I'm not signing that, I'm not white. He said he was gonna take me to jail if I would not sign the ticket that said I was white. I'm not joking, he was going to arrest me for putting, and he's the one who put inaccurate information on the ticket to cover up his pullover stats. So I wrote to the Connecticut Department, no, they had a Commission on Human Rights. I wrote to the Connecticut Department of the Commission on Human Rights to say, your police department is covering up its racial profiling stats. And they wrote back and said, there's nothing we can do. We have no say over what individual police officers do on the road in the course of their day-to-day duties. We hear a lot of this, passing on of accountability. Well, there's nothing we can do. Yes, we're a state agency, state government, but we don't dictate what law enforcement does on the street. Passing on of the buck. That just keeps everything rolling as it is with nothing ever changing. So here's a practical thing. Here's something we can do right here. And we have some folks engaged in this work right here in our community. You should learn about it. Engage in it, please. I ask you to. So Washtenaw County has a 5-year budgeting cycle. Its next 5, once it's set, it's set. It doesn't change for 5 years. Something like 60 to 70% of that budget is policing. It's the sheriff's department. Our county sheriff has said he'd happily have less money so that instead of it going to law enforcement, it can go to social supports to make the communities stronger and in less need of police enforcement actions. But guess what? Policing is an industry with vested commercial interests. So it takes the people having to say, we want a different budget. What can we do? Here's one thing we can do right now. Show up in the Washtenaw County budgeting cycle, say you want less money for law enforcement, more money for social support and social infrastructure, which is actually what we need in our county, and let's make it happen. They don't hear enough from us, the commissioners who engage in this process. If they do, if they hear from us what we want, what our people actually need, they have to follow. They will follow. We can trust that. But we have to engage. So there's one practical thing we can do. Thank you. A very good question. You see, you brought up a lot of sadness in me at first. I was like, yeah. But then look at the fire. There is stuff we can do. And there are people engaging this. So let me give you the organizations. ICPJ, the Interfaith, local, I'm blanking on the short acronym, what it stands for. But we partner with them, our local interfaith partner, and they are taking lead in trying to change the Washtenaw County budget. We should make a difference in that. I'm going to take one more from our youth, because you all are here. What led you to personally be a UU? Great question. Yeah, I grew up Hindu, so super conservative Hindu. Yeah, it was expected that I would have an arranged marriage, even though I was born and raised here. And I'm gay, so that a heterosexual arranged marriage was not going to work. So I figured that all out by my early 20s, and then I felt stuck. What do I do? So most of my 20s, I did this, I'm spiritual but not religious. I'm gonna do my own thing. And then I got to my mid to late 20s, and I was like, but wait, I had community. I grew up with community. We went to temple all the time, and everybody knew each other. It was a community for my family, and it's one that I grew up in, and I realized I kind of, what do we say? You say we threw the baby out with the bathwater. It's a horrible image, but literally I got rid of something really good and trying to solve a problem is what I did. And so I was in my mid to late 20s. I'm living in Washington, D.C., and I thought, what's possible? Are there religious or spiritual communities where I don't want to convert? I will never not be culturally Hindu. I am culturally Hindu. And so I wasn't going to convert and swear that I've left everything in my life behind. And a friend suggested Unitarian Universalism, and I went there I was 27 or 28 when I found Unitarian Universalism, something like that, about 27, I think. And been here since then, and it's been a good journey. Thank you for some beautiful questions there. Wow. Y'all, our younger ones, let's give them a round of applause. They're amazing. They're amazing. Thank you, kids, and thank you, YRUU group members. Thank you to all of those here and those who submitted questions in advance. We're now going to look at some of the questions from our adult community members. Well, there's a lovely flow to the questions, the randomly selected questions this morning. What can we do to help bring family members together across the political divide? Pay attention to the energy of how much we're trying to change other people. So in Buddhism, this energy is referred to as aggression. It means you're not accepting the other person as they are. So when we accept somebody as they are, we don't try to convince them that they're wrong and that we're right. We don't try to establish that they need to evolve or that their thinking is immature and ours is more mature and sophisticated. We just understand that they're at wherever they're at in their journey, and that I or you, if you're the interlocutor, you're in a different place. That can be okay. It actually used to be okay in our nation. Even when I was in university, when I was in college as an undergrad, I routinely had friends who were of all political understandings and persuasions, from like hardcore European socialist to practically communist to Republican. Free capitalism to the nth degree. Like that, in my friend circle, we had all of that. And now we won't even talk to people if there's shades of difference. People who in 90% or more have common values, but there's shades of difference, and we decide that we don't want to have anything to do with them anymore. I'm talking amongst liberals, people who call themselves liberal and progressive. We do this to one another, and we mostly agree about stuff on that end of the spectrum. We have grown to desire or want or need to establish that somebody else is wrong and that we ourselves are right. Whereas a different way of looking at that is, somebody else is at a different place in their journey, and I'm at a different place in my journey, and I can accept that without needing to invalidate the other person in order to establish my validity. It's hard. I have to do this in my own family. I mean, I'm very serious about that. I have to do this myself, and it is a constant. It has actually become a spiritual discipline for me. I remind myself, like very intentionally, we spoke about intention setting a few weeks ago. I remind myself, I am not here to change somebody else. I'm not here to force somebody else to learn something on their journey of growth. By the way, that doesn't work. You can't force somebody to learn something on their own personal journey. What it does, it creates resentment, and it creates friction. So this is where the stuff comes like that, in close circles of friends or family or whatever it is. It's when we show up with that energy of you're wrong and I'm right, or you need to grow up and become more mature, sophisticated because I am, or I need to convince you you're wrong, usually to establish that my viewpoint is better. Drop it. It's not necessary. It's not helping the world. Let me put it that way. Has that energy made anything better? We have tangible proof that our society is fraying because of this energy. It is a tattered cloth because of the embodiment of those energies. So only the opposite can serve for healing. Only the opposite can serve for healing, which is we start showing up with open-heartedness. Oh, okay, you have a very different life experience than me. Just tell me more. And usually when we ask about the more, tell me more, we can start to understand why the person has the life experience and the perspective they do. It usually makes sense if we allow ourselves to just really be present. Now, the concomitant challenge is, what if that energy's at us? The person's trying to change us, convince us. I saw a lot of this, especially when Mr. Trump was president. I'll tell you, it was unpleasant being at airports. I've been on airplanes where people were looking to pick a fight with their seat neighbors, making declarative statements and trying to set things on, metaphorically on fire, not the actual plane, but they're trying to start something. That's hard. But they're too spiritual practice. Can we just be ourselves? I'm not here in this embodiment to be angry, resentful, hostile in the world. I'm not anyway. I would hope that's true for most of us. I had to do a lot of telling myself, yeah, that's really unfortunate. God, can you imagine how stirred up that person must be? They're trying to pick a fight on an airplane where they've got a captive audience. The seatmate can't move. It's awful, actually. It's really awful. And how miserable must that person, kind of certain aspects of their life, their inner being, be to be trying to do that, to pick a fight in a public space with somebody who's essentially hostage to their opinion. That's not healthy people don't do that. We don't. People who are well-grounded don't do that. So we can find some compassion that something's really hard. Something's been really hard for this person. Something's been not well supported for them to be behaving this way, right? We can have a little bit of compassion and then not engage. And not engage. If the energy is directed towards you, don't engage. If you find yourself holding that energy, chill it out. It's not making the world a better place. Thank you for the individual who asked that. Why do you believe that our UUAA covenant needs an accountability practices alongside of it? Haven't we existed for a long time without accountability practices? Yeah, I would say that's exactly the point. And so what is an accountability? So actually, what are we talking about? All right. So we have words, such as the words that we said this morning, which we identify as our community's covenant. We have created, in the past 3 years or so, a team that supports us in our covenantal practices. So Unitarian Universalism is not a tradition of dogmatic belief. We do not all subscribe to the same sets of beliefs. We know this. Therefore, it is inevitable that we will have minor disagreements with one another. And sometimes if we're worked up, if any one of us is worked up on the inside, it can feel more than minor. It happens. It's quite common in Unitarian Universalist community, actually. It is the predictable outcome of the breadth of diversity that we embody. So what happens in the absence of any group to support those moments or times when we have that energy of feeling like wound up about our differences, and we might say or do the wrong thing, say or do something that hurts somebody? In the absence of any mechanisms to mediate that, somebody walks away feeling hurt, and they have to nurse that. And the nursing of that can become a resentment that festers in community in very unhealthy ways. Or, guess what? It gets kicked up to me personally. And we now, as most of you who have been following our congregation's arc and trajectory and narrative know, we have the smallest staff team we've had in probably 10 to 15 years. You do not want a finite resource such as me doing interrelational mediation. And at a smaller congregation, I can attest, because I've served smaller congregations, that becomes part of the senior minister's job. So in order to use our community's resources more effectively, so that your most significant in some ways resource is not devoted to interrelational mediation around the inevitable little hurts and slights that can happen around our vast diversity that we try to embody, We have a team that supports that. It's called the Living Our Values team. So what does the Living Our Values team do? They're a resource. Somebody has to identify that they felt hurt, wounded, upset about an encounter in community. The person who identifies that can go to that team and ask for support, guidance. What do? I don't know what to do about this. Somebody hurt my feelings in a committee or in an activity that I was at. I don't understand what happened. I'm feeling really disappointed about it. They can provide coaching. They can provide guidance. The person might say, even on the other side of coaching and guidance, I still don't know what to do. I don't feel confident about my skillfulness in trying to resolve this. They can invite mediation. They can invite a facilitated conversation to address and work through. It is not something that I decide and dictate down. It's who had an experience. That person has to step forward, name it, say that they want to work with it or seek some support with it, and then we have some conversation. That's actually how this process works. And it's a very good and healthy process compared to letting somebody walk away feeling hurt, disappointed, or wounded, and feeling like they have no recourse, or conversely, then dedicating your most significant resources, time and energy, to doing interpersonal mediation and facilitation. So it's a very good practice, one that we've stepped into. I wholeheartedly support it. Let's see. Okay, there's more than a sentence here, but I'll just read it and try to go along. I have a few longtime friendships where I've noticed of late that I alone seem to put in all the effort. I suspect if I pulled back, the relationship would wither completely, but also question if one-sided friendship is worth preserving. Wow, this is real. This has come up a lot in this pandemic context. So here's what's been happening. There's a lot that's been happening. I mean, this time, these 2 years. We, and when I say we, I also mean myself. That's how I get to the we. It's first I notice these things in myself, and then I'm like, oh, and I see other people are dealing with exactly the same thing. Exactly the same thing. So what's been happening, and therefore I'm saying I've experienced this and I've also observed it. We are very selective about our time. And it feels like it had something to do with that magical moment at the start of the pandemic 2 years ago. We all got to spend a lot of time at home and with our kids. It was joyous at first. Look, I have all this time at home now. Meetings are canceled, activities are canceled. I'm just going to hang out. And then when we got to month 6 of it, we're like, yeah, this needs to change. It's a little too much of that. But at the beginning, there was a joy in it, in finding that this ability that we could actually enjoy our homes, enjoy our families, enjoy some time that moved a little slower, a little differently, right? So coming out of that, it feels to me we are being very deliberate about choice along the entire spectrum of possibilities. What are we choosing to do activity-wise and not choosing to do? There's intense deliberation around that, intense intentionality. We're being thoughtful about it because it's a choice that's different from choosing the downtime, the at-home time, the free time, the time with family, the walks out in nature. It's a different choice than that. And we recognize, I think subconsciously or at times consciously, that in order to give up some of that stuff that we came to appreciate and value as a result of pandemic shutdowns, do I really still want to do that? I'm going to think about that. People have dropped activities all over the place. People have stopped being a part of activities and groups that they came to realize were tangential, not as important to them. Same thing has happened with friendships and connections. Friendships that have felt, because of the pandemic, well, who was checking in on me? Who cared enough to show up? Who cared enough to call and keep in touch to see how I'm doing? And I kept in touch to see how they're doing. Those are the friendships we're interested in maintaining and preserving, staying grounded in, staying dialogic in, deepening, maintaining. There are others. Well, they didn't do that. 2 years in. What, they didn't think of me once? I thought of them. I called. I made an effort. How come they didn't make any effort back? We're noticing these things. It's appropriate. It's appropriate to notice. It's appropriate to adjust. Now, I also feel, there's a pastoral piece to this. I feel a sadness. This individual is clearly sharing some sadness, that they're realizing that some friendships that they had thought might be closer might not be. That's also real. I do get that. And I hope that in the context of this community that you can feel supported. This is one of the places where we are striving to be in deeper relationship together. By the way, any deep relationship, disagreement and conflict comes up. I know of no deep relationship where it doesn't. So, but we are also committed to working through that, right? And that's how you get to deeper levels of friendship. It's the working through and working out disagreements, misunderstandings, miscommunications. That's how relationship naturally deepens. Our trust in other deepens as we work those things out. This is one of the places where we're committed to doing that, hence the practice I just spoke about a moment ago. It is a practice that helps us move into deeper relationship with one another. This is a place where I hope you'll be able to find that if some relationships or connections in the outside world have begun to not feel as close. That would be my hope and my deep hope and prayer for you. Thank you for asking that. There was a lot of vulnerability to that question. Time flies with these. Okay, I'm going to try and let's see if I can quickly do one more. What spiritual practices, books nourish you in difficult times? That's a great question. I have, over the course of my adult journey, I have pretty consistently turned to Buddhism when I'm at my lows. When I'm feeling like things are really distraught, I'm confused about something, or I've got some interpersonal relational difficulty, some disappointment in life, whatever it might be, I find I often turn to Buddhism. Buddhism's teachings on how the ways in which we can exacerbate our own suffering, get lost in our own suffering, are really profound. They're practices of noticing when we do that, when we're amping ourselves up, getting stuck in those energies. And they're practices that encourage us to gently note, not necessarily ignore those feelings inside, but to notice them with gentleness and care and love because they are real, and then notice what else exists. Because it's never just the difficulty. Life is never just one thing. It is always a myriad variety of things, even in its most difficult moments. And so those mindfulness practices invite us to notice, snow's kind of crummy, it's really cold out, but the snow's also beautiful. There's a beauty to our winter landscape on this day, even as it was really frigid coming in today, right? So Buddhism, yes, and then I intentionally work with a variety of spiritual teachers, but through one of them I've been learning about a Hindu guru. His name is Sadhguru. His teachings, there's a lot of videos of him, by the way, on YouTube if any of you are interested, but his teachings are also just really gorgeous. They're very similar to Buddhist teachings, they maybe perhaps with a little more of a mystical bent to them, a Hindu mystical bent. But yeah, find the things that ground you and orient you in those tougher moments. They are usually for me some practices that get me noticing my stuckness, get me being really present to the harder energies I'm navigating. And usually with the more I'm present to those things, some space opens up to notice other maybe more rounding out realities and energies. Why are religions important? Yeah, that's a great question from somebody who got a master's degree in that. For someone who got a master's degree in that. So why did I do that? Why did I pursue higher studies, advanced studies in the field of religion? You know, for me, it's a field of inquiry. So there's multiple pieces to it. One, it's a field of inquiry. Like any field of inquiry, it's seeking to move us in deeper and deeper ways in that field, right? So science or medicine, it's helping us move deeper into that inquiry of what does it mean to have a physical body, for example. This is a field of inquiry that deals with heart, spirit, essence, like all the inside-y stuff that is not necessarily physical, but is nonetheless real. So it's a part of the movement, the field of inquiry, to kind of go deeper and deeper into that. Like, what is that all about? And then, therefore, answer important questions. And so one of the things, if you actually do pursue religion, advanced studies in religion, one of the things you're told early is that every religion has the answer to. There's one question that every religion answers, every last one. What happens when we die? And there may be different answers, but they all answer that. But guess what? There's no way to answer that question without also answering what's the purpose of living. So that tells you something about the inner impulse, the inner wonderings that are intrinsic to our species, which is like, we know we have finite time. On a certain level, it freaks us out. We know we're going to die. The time ends. But if it's going to end, then what are we living for? What's the point of living, right? It's beautiful. It actually, one question leads, like, it's a full circle. It leads you back to, like, an even deeper, more important question. That's the original question. That actually should be the starting point. What's the point of being human? This is what this field helps us with. And there's different answers. The answers are widely divergent. I can attest, as somebody who grew up fairly conservative Hindu, the answers are wildly different depending on where we wind up. I think that speaks to that question. This is good. How can someone start building spiritual practices from, if you don't have one, like if there's no starting point for such in your life? That's a really good question. So the first part of that is needing to kind of understand that there isn't one thing that's a spiritual practice. Of course, there are spiritual practices that are like, you could say, the bigger ones that we hear about, that are most often we think of when we think of spiritual practice. In many denominations, including ours, a practice of prayer can be considered a spiritual practice. Meditative practices, often drawing on Buddhist and other traditions, those can be spiritual practices of mindfulness. Okay, so they're the things where we probably associate as being spiritual practices. But that's not it. That's not all that exists. And that's where I think I've learned over time that our ability to creatively step into the notion of a spiritual practice is often limited by what we think, by the cultural reference points of what we think a spiritual practice needs to be. Now here's where actually our friends in Zen Buddhism can be really helpful, because these are the folks that in the tradition who've written things like Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance or Zen and the Art of Cooking. And what those authors in those traditions are trying to lift up is like literally anything can be a spiritual practice. So including motorcycle maintenance, including cooking. So what distinguishes a spiritual practice as opposed to just regular day-to-day time? You have to pay attention to the quality of your what's happening here, the quality of your inside dialogue, and the quality of here. And then the quality of here. What I mean here is connectivity. Connectivity, which for me is very tangible. I can feel it. It's a very tangible thing for me. But on the here part, most human beings spend most of our days, we have an inner monologue that is fairly perseverating. We'll perseverate about things we're worried about, or upcoming things we're worried about, or a meeting we just had, or an encounter we just had that we're worried about. Or to-do lists of things I have to practically get done and navigate in my life. It's a fairly nonstop monologue. That's not a spiritual practice. Just being in the flow of that monologue is not a spiritual practice. It's maybe existing, it's maybe getting through the day, but it's not what we mean by a spiritual practice. So often what's happening here when we're in those wrapped up dialogues they're on a loop, they just keep going. There's other things that happen. We often are not paying attention to our bodies as much, and we're not paying as much attention to our inner movements, which can be emotional and spiritual movements and energies. So spiritual practices, if they're good, if they're really effective, They're hopefully helping get us to a more integrated place where head, heart, body are a bit more in sync. One is not dominating, but they're equally important, and we're finding our way to that. When we find our way to that, this part calms down. It's slower. It's less afraid. It's less worried. It's less looking for the next problem on the horizon. It's more present. And when we can get to that, we hear our inside, our heart, soul, spirit, essence. We hear it more clearly. We can also pay attention to the signals in our body. I forgot lunch, or I'm late for lunch. My body's clearly telling me that. Ooh, maybe I would be less worried and anxious if I had a meal. But we can get to all of that, right? The equal care of all three: emotional, spiritual, body, cognitive, mental. Equal care of all three spiritual practices are a pathway to helping us with that. And a spiritual practice can be anything. So here's where you get to experiment. Sure, it could be a prayer practice, it could be meditation, it could be journaling, it could be contemplative walking out in nature. Those are common things. And it could be something very uncommon. Maybe tending to an ant farm could be a spiritual practice if you wanted it to be. I'm sure it could be, actually, if you brought present mind to it, if you brought care and love to it, if it grounded you, if it worked for you. So here's the thing: we're built as different as there are billions of people on this planet. No two of us are exactly alike, and therefore energy, spirit, finding our way to that deeper inner ground is different for each of us, just as it logically would be, given how different each of us is. So it's an experimental process. You have to play around a little bit and take it as creativity. Mindfulness meditation didn't work. It just wasn't clicking for me. Well, I tried journaling. It's not bad, but I'm not really finding a way to deeper peace through that. Keep experimenting. Keep trying stuff. Be playful about it. It's an opportunity to just play and try stuff out. Try art. That's been my calling in recent days. I guess I got these messages, as many of us do when we're younger, that you're not artistic, you can't sing, you can't dance, whatever, all this stuff. I want to try creative stuff at this stage of my life. And I'm finding that as I give myself over to that, there's a centering, there's a connectivity of heart, mind, inner essence, spirit, all of that. The creativity does that for me. So play around, try stuff out. When you come onto something that works, do more of that. Stick with it. Do more of that. Now here's the next thing. Like going to the doctor at times, it can feel like a chore. It can still be good for you, even if it can feel like a chore. And the thing is, it's called a practice because if we don't do it, we don't find some regular way to do it. And if you've been tapping into like recent sermons I've offered in earlier weeks, like even 5-minute ways to do this. A spiritual practice does not have to be an hour long. It can be as short as 5 minutes if you find the right thing, if you find the thing that really resonates with you, that'll really center you and ground you. And when you can't do it, start and make it regular, because actually when we need it when things are hard. And we're not going to do a spiritual practice when it's hard if we haven't already had the practice of doing it all along. What happens is when the challenging things shows up, we go straight to perseverating. There's no room for any spiritual practice at that point in time. So the point of the practice is we figure out what works for us and we're consistently doing it so that when things are hard, we can remember, there's more to life than the difficulty. I connect with nature, I connect with music, I connect with art, I connect with my inside life through mindfulness. It reminds us we're already on a path, a routine that will help us when things are hard. Great question, thank you. And you weren't alone in that. Other people have been wondering stuff like that too, like what does it mean to step into a spiritual practice? Oh, wow. What is my spiritual purpose? Okay, you know what, there's a beauty to this. This happened in the first service too. Okay, so if you're doing the thing I just talked about, the thing that's helping us to greater stillness and being able to hear ourselves, which includes hearing our body, which includes hearing inner wisdom, not just the active mind that obsesses about stuff. If we get to that space and can consistently be in that kind of relationship with our own inner wisdom, you will know. Now take this, the irony of this is I am somebody who has probably obsessed about this question for most of my adult life. Like, what is my spiritual purpose? Am I in the right place? Am I with the right people? Am I doing the right thing? Like, should I be doing something different with a different people, different community, different way? I literally obsessed about this question most of my adult life. And for me, where I've wound up is like, it's actually an unfolding for me. There isn't one answer. And so being present to that deeper sense of self, which comes out of practice, allows us to be present to the unfolding answers as they unfold. I can trust that, yes, today I'm in the right place with the right people. The work's different today. Believe me, it's different today than it was pre-pandemic. Night and day different. And that's okay. It's okay that it's different. That's what I'm called to do and be right now, and how I'm called to show up, right? So finding our way to that inner ground of being helps us be present to the unfolding. Spiritual purpose is not static, it's an unfolding. It evolves and changes. So listen. And nobody can help you with this too, unfortunately. Only you can come up with the answer that you're looking for. There's a beauty to that too, though. It makes it fun. It can be fun. Let it be fun. Yeah, less serious. Let it be playful and fun. Can be fun. Okay, last one-ish. How do I share hope with my, this is important. How do I share hope with my kids when the pandemic makes any plan or dream unstable? My 8.5-year-old is sad that we can't count on, specific activities and things that we want to be able to do. Yeah, that's real. I feel that too. Clearly, I feel that as a parent of a 10-year-old and a 7-year-old. That's been very hard, kind of being present to that and witnessing that for those of us who are parents or grandparents or connected to little ones right now. Seeing the losses that our kids have had to navigate, even as we're trying to understand and navigate and make sense out of our own adult losses, to see the kids struggling and grieving has been really hard, very painful. And I know that. I feel that too. So what does hope and possibility look like in the middle of that? I've also given up trying to figure out when the pandemic is going to end. I caught myself a week or two ago. I was like, well, the curve is just starting to turn on Omicron. Maybe this is it. Maybe this is now the end point of the virus and it'll settle down. And who knows? We're 2 years into this. Like the moment I should know better than to even let my mind think that at this point in time. I just don't know. Maybe none of this is changing for a while still. It's not what I want, but that seems to be the proven trajectory so far. So given that, what does hope and possibility look like? I'd say, so what has the pandemic taught us? It's taught us to notice smaller things and go local, go smaller, and really relish those things, right? So what do I mean by it? Hopefully you know what I mean by that, because I feel like it's a collective thing we've been figuring out and learning. Our lives narrowed, right? And initially it was just like to our house in those days of lockdown. And there was an initial joy of that. Great, more time at home. Wow, I never spent this much time at home. This is great. More time with kids. Great, 6 months in, more time with everybody that I've been seeing nonstop for 6 months now. And there's still a joy in that, in the way things have narrowed down a little bit. It can be joyful just to have a simple meal together that's well cooked. It can be joyful to play a game together. It can be joyful to do an art project together. It can be joyful to go on a walk together. Yeah, I don't know how many nature walks my family and I did prior to the pandemic. Probably not that many. I mean, when we were intentionally going on like a hiking trip or vacation. But like now, occasionally there's nature walks, and sometimes the kids ask for it. They want to go on a nature walk. There's a beauty to that. There's a simplicity and a beauty to that. So I think hope and possibility have and probably do reside right now in simple things that we forget to view as beautiful. And certainly pre-pandemic, we didn't necessarily consider these high points. Oh yeah, I'm going on a nature walk. That's the high point of my whole week. We wouldn't have thought that pre-pandemic necessarily. And during this time, it has at times been that, hasn't it? That's right, actually. That's actually appropriate. Those little things that we would dismiss as not being important They always were. And in fact, if we can't find some sense of contentment, some sense of beauty, some sense of joy in those things, the only things that will suffice in the absence of that are really, really big, grand things. And really, really big, grand things are few and far between. The day-to-day joys are better. Notice them, relish them. Invite appreciation in your family, in your relationship with your friends, with your kids, grandkids. Invite the noticing of it. That is possible. It's always been possible. And in fact, it's a stepping stone to greater contentment. There's no larger contentment without this piece. So with that, I want to thank you all for some beautiful questions this morning. Please know that I read every last one that you all submit, and it's always a privilege to do so, and you will no doubt find themes emerging in future services where we start to integrate other questions that have come up. Thank you so much for participating in this. It's a joy to be on this journey together with you.